I am Péter Horányi. Welcome to this event. I am the program curator of Verzió Documentary Film Festival, and I was also the curator of the Ukrainian documentary section this year. And welcome here at this panel discussion and masterclass hybrid. First of all, I would like to say that I am not very used to English language presentations, so I apologize if my English is a little bit rusty at times, but I will be trying to be clear and precise. This event will be, as I said, divided into two parts. The first part will be a short masterclass, which will be 20 or 30 minutes long. I will talk about citizen witnessing and the visual representation of the Ukrainian war through documentaries and social media. And after the masterclass, I will invite the stage two of the filmmakers that are here today, Ewan Waddell and Liubov Dyvak. They are the creators of the documentary film, The Longer You Bleed. The Longer You Bleed is part of our competition this year in the Ukrainian section. And I think it is a very valuable film because it addresses several important topics and also ethical issues related to how you approach the Ukrainian war through social media and how does the war is being represented through social media. So after the masterclass, I will invite Ewan and Liubov on the stage, and we will be talking about their filmmaking perspective and their approach regarding this topic. So, if you are ready, then we will start now. You can hear me, right? Okay. So, first of all, I think it is good to start this presentation with a little bit of a historical perspective. I will be very brief, but the title of this event is The Ukrainian War as Citizen Witnessing, Documentary Practices in a Mediated Conflict. So, first of all, the very first thing that we need to address is what is citizen witnessing and how is it related to documentary filmmaking. And then, in a historical context, we are talking about citizen witnessing. The very first topic that we reach is the so-called camcorder culture and its relation to the rise of citizen witnessing. Camcorder culture started in the 1960s, and it is related to how easily usable and mobile equipment started to be very accessible, and citizens started to film their surroundings, and they started to film their everyday situations and lives as well. You know, the typical home movie aesthetics started in the 60s. But this was not only an aesthetics, but it also held an important evidentiary value sometimes. The first instance of citizen witnessing happened in the early 60s during the assassination of JFK Kennedy. Hi. So, as you can see, this is the Zapruder footage, a very early example of citizen witnessing. And when I say citizen witnessing, I am talking about the thing where it's not the professional media who follows and who observes and who finds the historical object, but rather a bystander, a regular citizen who happens to be there and happens to film this very event. So yes, the assassination of President Kennedy was a very early example of historical citizen witnessing. But if we move forward, there was one historical trauma, a very important and grandiose and traumatic historical event that happened in the turn of the century, and it was, of course, the September 11th attack, which was the first large-scale case of citizen witnessing. And why this was important is that this was the first instance in history when there was not just one way of observing this thing that happened, but there were several different type of, like observations of it. So thousands and thousands of citizens have saw the events and they just grabbed their cameras and they started to film. So if we look at the footages of the September 11th attack, the footages that we see are always or usually made by citizens, made by amateurs that were just there. And also the first documentaries that were made were also using only citizen footage. And this was just my introduction, and the next chapter is more related to how documentary film functions as a way of remediation and as a way of remediating already existing footages. I would like to quote one film historian named John Ellis, who said, "Today, documentary film is less about capturing an unseen world and more about making sense of a world that is already visually saturated. Rather than revealing the unknown, it organizes, interprets, and contextualizes images that pre-exist within our media environment." I think this one sentence from John Ellis is although not 100% right, because he's not 100% right, let's just say that, but it is regardless a very, very important quote for him. Because what is he saying? He's saying that documentary filmmakers in this day of age are not so interested in observing worlds that were unknown before. So they are not like, people who are reaching into far sides of the world and showing you things that were not visually represented before. Because the early case of documentary cinema was exactly about that. They were expedition movies and films where people went into far continents and filmed the things there, and they showed it and bring it into the cinemas in Europe and in the United States, and they just showed the films. So early documentary, of course, I'm just being a little bit general here, so it's not applied to every type of documentaries, but early documentary generally was about reaching into the unknown and showing you new things that were not represented visually. And what John Ellis says is that in the digital age, and in the age of the internet, when there is a visual turn, you have already probably heard the word the visual turn, where everything is being visually represented already, and there are several information and images and texts and videos and amateur footages and professional footages. They are all circulating in the internet. So in the age of remediation, the documentary's role is changing as well. This is what John Ellis is saying. So the role of documentary in the 21st century is not so much to show something new, but rather to contextualize the text, the information, the visual data that is already on the internet. So the role of the filmmaker is changing as well, because his purpose is to give meaning to all the information that already exists on the internet. Of course, when I say things like this, I'm not saying that there are no documentaries that still follow the observational approach and still just use visual language their own. But here are some exciting examples. Life in a Day was made in 2011, and it's a YouTube documentary. And the unique aspect of this documentary were that it's only using civilian footages. The filmmaker, Scott MacDonald, who is a famous documentary filmmaker, asked the people around the internet to film themselves during one day and to send their footages to him. And the film is nothing else, just a collage of one day from the world. And later on, Scott MacDonald made a second part of this film, which is called Life in a Day 2 or something. It was made in 2020. And it was made during COVID. Now we are getting closer to Ukrainian documentaries. This was just the contextualization. So as I said before, citizen witnessing is not just an aesthetical thing. It is also a valuable tool regarding providing evidence in a documentary. Yes, this is also from John Ellis. Sorry for not quoting him correctly, but he also said that the remediation of civilian recordings within documentary practice can function as a significant evidentiary resource in addressing a particular topic. If we look at successful documentaries from the last years or so, we can see the important aspect of this kind of evidence or evidentiary status. For example, Collective, this film was released in 2019. It was directed by Alexander Nanau. You have probably saw this film. I think it was Oscar nominated or even won the Oscars. This film shows footages from the Collective Club as it burns down. And it has some very haunting and extreme footages that are evidentiary, that has evidentiary value. Or there is the David France film, Welcome to Chechnya. This film is about how they made it legal in Chechnya to basically not only punish or to basically they criminalized homosexuality in Chechnya. And this film uses several citizen witness footages. It's also a very haunting film. And there is one last example of Caravan and the Dogs, which is about the media in Russia and how it is being repressed by the state government. So yes, citizen witnessing can also function as evidence in the age of remediation. And now that we have addressed this topic, it is time to look at some films. But these films, is it working? Oh, it's working. But these films are about the Ukrainian war. So the full-scale invasion happened 3 years ago, and I'm a little bit surprised by it, but the representation through documentary media regarding the Ukrainian war is extremely rich. I made a little bit of a counting before arriving here, and there are at least 900 documentaries related to the Ukrainian war. So I think this is a good thing, but it is very surprising. And probably the reason behind this is that this is the very first war in history, or maybe I should say that this is the most well-documented war in history. And there are so many footages related or regarding this war that there is just so many material to use. I am not trying to give you how this type of documentaries work, because there are just too many types of films. But there is one very important reoccurring factor in them, and that is, of course, the usage of citizen witnessing. The film you can see here is a British documentary called Mariupol, the People's Story. This film was released in 2022, so this was a pretty early example. And what is unique about this film is that it only uses citizen footage. It also has some interviews, and the interviews are served as a part of explaining the footages. So this film is a very good example of what John Ellis said again. It's not just showing you the footages, like you are on Instagram or YouTube and you are just watching all the footages, but it gives you context. So the role of the film is to put all the footages into a bigger context and a bigger narrative. And now I'm going to show you a clip of this film so you can understand it better.
I think I'm feeling like the most scared in my life. When you're scared or when there is war around. Oh yeah, it's coming. Fuck. You only hear the shelling and it's getting closer and closer and closer. They started hitting the city center. You find yourself in a horror movie. There were several air strikes. All this shit around is scary.
Сюда летит.
Готово?
Да. Мій син дуже не хотів спускатися у бомбосховище, для нього це було дуже важко емоційно, він дуже голосно кричав, плакав, і цю істерику неможливо було зупинити.
Мам, я хочу свободу.
Ну, воды хотя бы надо сюда принести.
Мам, не надо. Мам, не надо.
Здесь безопасно, не волнуйся.
Пожалуйста, не надо. Это безопасно. Здесь не страшно. Страшно дома.
Після потужного обстрілу, внаслідок якого в нас просто винесло вікна, ми зібрали речі, які змогли унести, і пішли. Найстрашніше – це тіло, яке лежало біля 3-го під'їзду, загорнуто в простирадло, біля якого плакала жінка.
Когда усилились взрывы, приходилось уже ночевать в этом подвале. В подвале, конечно, было сыро, холодно, пыль была такая, то, что дети очень сильно кашляли.
Ой, привет, сладкая. Ты хочешь спать, кидать?
Это дети, они активные. Очень много людей, шуметь нельзя, там бегать нельзя. Никита не понимал, за что на нас напала Россия. Сложно объяснить ребенку, который спрашивает, а что мы сделали такого, что на нас напала страна Россия. Он говорит, ну а что, почему? И сложно мне, взрослому, ответить на такой вопрос, почему. Это было очень сложно, очень сложно.
Ощущение какого-то кошмара, нелепого кошмара, нелогичного кошмара, из которого я не могу до сих пор выйти. Мне кажется, что меня скоро разбудят и скажут, это был сон, Юля, все в порядке.
Двор как двор. А вот это вот война. Это самый центр Мариуполя. Спустя неделю такая у нас гуманитарная катастрофа с мусорниками. Никто не...
Выстрелы стали более интенсивными, и мы поняли, что мы в ловушке.
А вот сюда прилетело людям прямо во двор. Вот эта вот рама от взрывной волны просто тупо вылетела из окна 2-го этажа.
Я уже смирилась с тем, что ни света, ни связи, ни воды, ни газа, ничего не будет. И встал вопрос о том, что же делать дальше, да, как выживать.
Туалет, в который ходит весь двор. Не буду больше, потому что канализационный стояк забит. Вот так вот мы живем, сука, в 21 веке.
Ежедневно город катился в какую-то пропасть непонятную.
Таким вирішальним фактором стало для нас відключення газопостачання.
После того, как газа не стало, люди были вынуждены готовить еду на улице.
Вот это наша общедомовая полевая кухня. Наши мужчины молодцы.
Горячая еда в Мариуполе – это была большая роскошь.
И нашу духовку, надо обязательно нашу духовку снять.
Это ноу-хау.
Когда я ела, начался опять обстрел. Ну, съесть суп горячим было намного важнее, нежели там спасать свою жизнь.
В городе творился просто хаос. Просто хаос.
Ну вот смотри, вот просто люди закапывают трупы своих соседей у себя во дворе. Вот просто во дворе, блядь. Это просто, это катастрофа.
А как ее дверь? Блядь. Давайте оттащим, пожалуйста.
Бери, пошли. Тащи. Во, помогай. Понимаете, пизда.
Мы уже думали, что мы там не выживем. И мы это как-то принимали. Мы написали номера телефонов. Я написала моей маме. Я вложила Никите в карман. На случай, если как-то мы рассоединимся. И вдруг его кто-то найдет, чтобы смогли связаться с родственником.
You can turn the lights on again. Thank you. Maybe it will happen eventually. Thank you. So, if you look at this clip, you can see a fairly linear structure. There is, of course, the amateur footage, and there's always an interview, and what all holds all this together is the music, basically. If you paid attention, the music is always there. It's always very, very dramatic, and it gives this sort of a cohesive structure to all these footages that were made by several people that do not know each other. Okay, this is the next topic. When we look at Ukrainian documentaries that depict the war, of course, most of them are very serious. There are basically two types of films. One film is the type that I was talking about, that uses amateur footage, and the other type of films have this sort of a professional look. Films like Militanthropos, which is here at the festival, or films like Intercepted. They are these very professional and serious observational documentary films that just watch the daily life of Ukraine. But this year, there's a new film, which is called Cuba and Alaska, the film you can see here now. And the interesting approach or aspect of this film is that it also uses citizen witnessing and citizen footages, but from a very different perspective, because this film uses these footages for humor and for comedy as well. The film depicts two medical professionals who are working on the front, Cuba on the left and Alaska on the right. And they have a great sense of humor, and they are sort of, have this performative type of being in front of the camera. And I would also like to show you a footage from this film, the introduction, the intro of the film, because it shows how humor and comedy can be used as a way of a coping mechanism. This is also a thing that will be very important in The Longer You Bleed, that you can use comedy to sort of shield yourself from the horrors of the war and to distance yourself from it. And I think this film, Cuba and Alaska, is a good example of that. So let's watch a sequence from this film as well. The first few minutes of the film. Sorry for stopping it, but you can see this image. It's already very telling. It's Cuba holding her phone with her inner camera, but there's also a GoPro on her head. So it's a sort of a endless loop of recordings. She's recording herself as she's being recorded by herself. I think this image is a beautiful example of how the war is very represented visually, and how we just document ourselves in a performative way, because she is documenting herself as she's being documenting herself. So the act of documenting is not just an act of observing and just an act of being there, but it's also sort of an act of performance. So she's being like an actor, like an actress, sorry. And I think this is important because this is connected to the comedic aspect of the film. Like she's being acting in this whole situation. And this is the defensive mechanism of it all. I am not there, I'm just an actress, and I'm sort of in a performative state. Let's watch the footage, and thank you.
А де 300-й? Що?
Чё? Да, грузный.
Смотри, вещь, блядь.
Это значит, блядь, больше 100%, блядь, по 80.
Щоб вони здохли всі, блядь, ці русняві подальші.
И умру я не на постели при нотариусе и враче, а в какой-нибудь дикой щели, утонувшей в густом плюще. Правда, тут одуванчики. Гумилев про одуванчик ёбаный. Ничего не придумал.
Небо над нами розірвалось, полилось. Не треба рятувати весь світ. Спробуй урятувати хоча б когось.
Да, не будьте пидорасы. Блядь! Полезли под лавку.
Що, все?
Куба, Аляска.
І тільки довго дивишся. артисты, да, блядь, этот камикадзе, блядь. Блядь. Енот в клубе приема.
Енот на приеме.
Это пизда. Ветеринарка уехала на помощь братанам. Ебучий. Сука. Какнула?
Нет. Вони валять чуть-чуть в ту сторону, то іди краще за чутки.
Если нас заебошат, твои последние слова.
Я вас всех люблю.
Я вас всех, сука,
и все
ненавижу.
Буде Україна, блядь.
Все буде Україна. Не будьте пидорасами.
Давай я сзади сяду.
Ной. Руку смотри, руку.
Давай, что идет? Опа, давай.
Осторожно, машина.
А там не стекает он нигде. Надо где-то остановиться.
Нет, нельзя, едем.
Едем.
Ты воин, молодец.
Ты лучший.
Вова, глянь в руку.
Что с рукою?
Кровит.
Кровит?
Да. Но лужа уже приличная натекла.
Там не сильно, коли багато немає. Мене дивує, як взагалі там ніхто не помер.
Серця не судило, і суботу на неділю курінням варила.
Мы очень-очень тупые. И до нас доходит поздно, что надо бояться.
Ну да.
А потом это уже не актуально.
Хрестили, колем пусте відро, через вулицю носила. Сусідися пояли, моя кола хоче чорних фотош підмала.
На городі конопельки то великі, то маленькі, чи всім людям така біда, яка мені молоденькі, як він знав, що всім
Скільки пам'ятаються на війні, в основному потім усвідомлюєш, що там було дуже ризиковано, і ти реально міг загинути. Те, що смерть була за крок від тебе, вже коли проходить доволі багато часу. Тобто там ти відбувається, що якщо ти в якісь дії, ти там маєш щось робити, ти не думаєш і не сприймаєш там це так. А потім, нічого собі, це ж могло би там закінчитися по-інакшому.
Звідки з'явилися позивні Куба та Аляска?
Я колись на Казантіп їздила, і мене там так прозвали, бо я ходила з африкосами і дуже сильно засмагали, і казали, що там схоже на кубінку, кріолку, там ще там на когось, а потім з часом просто почали називати Куба і все. Я не знаю, чому Аляска.
Далекое отмороженное.
Знати з кам'ї.
The mobile technologies in this film, such as mobile cameras and GoPros, provide the film a sort of an embodied experience, like you are being there at the battlefield and you are watching, as you are watching a film, you are almost like in the point of view of the characters. So this is a clear example of how these digital technologies can give a very embodied and personal and intimate experience in documentary filmmaking. But if we quote Jonathan Crary, who is a famous media theorist, he said in the 19th that digital technologies give a more and more mediated experience in our lives. What this means is that the way we receive informations and the way we generally perceive the world is getting less and less embodied, but rather disembodied. For example, our everyday lives we are surrounded by media that broadcasts this information that is not happening in our close surroundings. And these type of informations that are coming in, we are not perceiving them with our bodies, but through technology and through computers and through mobile phones and through television. And this is how we turn our attention to The Longer You Bleed, which is basically, the film addresses several interesting and very important topics, but if there is one cohesive topic about it, I think, is the mediation part which Jonathan Crary is talking about. So this film is not about the embodied experience of war, like Cuba and Alaska, but about the mediated experience of it. The film follows several Ukrainian refugees who are now living in Berlin, and they are following the war through social media. The film addresses citizen witnessing and also recording as a weapon, which I think is a pretty new topic, and I haven't seen any other films that were talking about this. And it also addresses humor as a coping mechanism, such as Cuba and Alaska. And lastly, desensitization of media. So these are the four topics that I think are very important in this film. And before I invite the stage Ewan and Liubov, I would just like to play you the trailer of the film. And you can watch the entire movie tomorrow at Verzió Film Festival.
Things that was unbelievable in the past just become normal. You can be oversensitive to everything or like completely numb. You don't know how to react normally because like normality is something like from past life.
We were eating her fancy cake while our neighbors were dying in the next house. But we still enjoyed the cake.
We enjoyed the cake because what else you can do?
15 people died and like 4 kids. I was start crying. I cannot stop. But now when I see, I'm just like scrolling it, and it's always like, oh, next. I'm feeling that like I'm a bit dead inside. I don't know. Is it like I'm not so sensitive anymore? You know.
If you're interested what is inside body, you could discover it in many ways, watching the footage from the war in Ukraine. Everything you could even imagine, you could see, unfortunately.
Our intention to spread awareness and actually help, it might work opposite when it becomes like normal and people just don't pay attention on this anymore. It should be something more shocking, more provoking. Atomic bomb probably, or so too, extremely violent. But it will be in use for a certain amount of time, and after that, it's just history.
It is the most genuine response to the stress. Like if you make fun of it, you like trying to laugh about it, it becomes easier to cope.
I'm just watching through my iPhone. I have iPhone. I have a lot of fancy scene which don't matter to me anymore. Which just doesn't matter. When you wake up, you reach in your phone, you look some horror pictures, you look at some fun pictures. People keep living their lives. It just become like one horrific routine.
So now the masterclass part is over, and I would like to invite on the stage Liubov Dyvak and Ewan Waddell, the creators of The Longer You Bleed. Hi, thank you. Thank you for being here and for watching my masterclass. First of all, my question is that what was the starting point for this film? Because I think, and as I said in the conversation, in the presentation, this film addresses several topics, at least 4 or 5 very important and ethically interesting topics. Did you have a certain starting point to start with this movie, and how did it came to be?
Well, firstly, thank you for the invitation. I can't say that there was a clear starting point. Like the film that exists now as The Longer You Bleed is not a film that we set out to make. Like, Luba escaped from Kiev to Berlin, where I was living at the time, and we met, and then suddenly I was kind of deeply within a Ukrainian community going through all of these issues, and I felt kind of driven. I wanted to do something to help. I have, a vague background in film, and so I thought, what if I can somehow make some sort of documentary that could promote awareness of a dimension of this topic? And so Luba and I worked together to, because you can't just make a general film about the war. It has to be more specific and precise, I think, for it to have value and for it to, be universal in a sense. So we tried to think about what might be different, unique, what elements of this war and the fallout of the war people weren't talking about. And so the kind of, I could say we were doing research by interviewing, Luba, and because Luba's both producer of the film and also the protagonist of the film, and so together we were interviewing her friends and the Ukrainian community in Berlin to try and understand what different perhaps contemporary issues are arising from this new displaced experience that exists within modernity. And so a number of things came up. Bureaucratic struggles, misinformation online, but what was perhaps the most recurring and consistent theme was this interplay of social media with one's emotions, this topic of desensitization and this like citizen witnessing topic, and so we decided to kind of focus on that because it's something that was so common in conversations, like everyone around us was kind of talking about like how this overwhelming ocean of traumatic imagery is affecting our minds, and how bizarre it is to experience it like juxtaposed with the most trivial bullshit, meaningless content on social media, and like our information space is just this chaotic mess of emotions. But we didn't see any films about this. We didn't see much media which was diving deep into it, and so the film project is a reflection of our organic investigation into that.
You said in the film that that you had a certain way of consuming social media, the war, and it changed in a year or so. You said something like that in the film, and I was wondering, how do you now consume these type of footages? Do you still follow the Ukrainian war through social media, or if so, is it a different experience for you than it was first when you first started to live in Berlin? Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yes, sure. Thank you for your question. So, can you hear me? So for me, okay. Yeah. So I think this topic is very closely tied to some psychological mechanism, which is like not related to social media, but more to the way how people relive in like traumatic experience. Because and it's not only my experience. When full-scale invasion just starts, most of the people, they were shocked and they have various of responses, but most of them, they will feel like a lot of anger, unfairness, like, and they were ready to fight in a way. They were like active, they were like very given, very united. And I think because now it's a long-term conflict, it comes with the waves, because your nervous system can't be wired all the time. And in the end of the movie, I experienced some psychological issues myself, such as depression. So in a way, yeah, I felt numb to the information. And of course, I still following the war. And my parents and a lot of my friends stayed in Ukraine, so like I couldn't and I would not want to isolate myself from all this information. And of course it's not so shocking for me anymore, because you kind of, it sounds horrible, but you get used to the fact that this is what's happening, and it's painful, it's but it's not shocking anymore. Yeah. That's the sad reality.
Okay, so this format we have now is sort of a hybrid, because this is not only a Q&A about the film, but about this type of topic in general. And my next question is to both of you, that do you watch Ukrainian documentaries generally? And if so, is there a type of film that you prefer, or is there a type that you do not really prefer?
I don't watch as many Ukrainian documentaries as I would like to, but, you know, unsurprisingly more than the average person, just because, you know, for instance, we have the privilege of touring around with this film, The Longer You Bleed, and so we're within programs with great Ukrainian documentaries, and, you know, talking about this film from different angles, from the military angle, like, you know, the one that comes to mind also on this program, 2,000 Meters to Andrivka, and then various other genres and styles of documentary. And yeah, I do watch them. In terms of like what I prefer and what I don't prefer, I suppose I can't say I've seen any which I would be overly critical of, because I think each have their own value and angle. But yeah, I mean, just going back to something you mentioned in your introduction, there is so many different films, and that's been something which I've found like quite inspiring, that so much great media and you know, thoughtful art has come out of this to represent these different topics. But yeah, I can't say that it's prioritize one over another, because I think there's value in all different shapes.
For me personally, I think I really enjoy the personal movies like Cuba and Alaska, which is following this like just strong characters, and I think it's a lot of angles to look at the story, and of course I think it's very important to do this more serious and like panorama movies. But for me personally, it's very interesting to look on this just human stories. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, as you were saying that, someone else came to mind. Do you remember a film we saw, In the Rear View? Do you know this film?
Sure.
Yeah, it's this documentary that follows a Polish volunteer who was evacuating people from occupied regions in 2022. And I think that really embodies something, which I suppose we tried to do with our film as well, is the exploration of the broad spectrum of human emotions in these periods of time. It's, of course, you know, you'd expect a documentary, a film about a war to be perhaps purely depressing or grim, and it's necessary to represent those awful elements to it. But what is also very present in those moments is yeah, like I said, the broad spectrum of human emotion, like the mundanity, the lightness, the humor as a defense mechanism. And this film, In the Rear View, I think, has some very powerful moments of that. And it's, yeah, I didn't actually get the chance to see Cuba and Alaska, but it seems like that's one as well, which represents the dynamic nature of those experiences. And I think it's a valuable dimension of this to document and explore.
In The Longer You Bleed, you go to Ukraine during a certain part of the movie, and there's a very interesting part of that, is that you, Evan, as a narrator, you say to the audience that something like, as you arrived, you felt like it doesn't feel as real as through media. And I think that part of the film is perhaps a little bit brief, but it addresses a very important and interesting topic. Like, can you explain a little bit, how did you feel when you went to Ukraine, and how was it for you that made you say that it was a sort of a distant experience for you?
Sure. To give context, when we started making this film in Berlin, it was very much looking at through the lens of the displaced experience, witnessing this war and experiencing this war through social media and algorithms. And then at a certain point in the film, we traveled to Kiev, where Liub's from, and I talk about in the narration the fact that I suppose I was expecting that, because to that point I'd obviously been, as just a human being, absorbing all this stuff in social media about the war, the awful images, the awful reality, as well as having people close to me who were suffering in a very deep way from it. And I suppose I thought that despite having absorbed all this media and images, that still when I go to encounter these sites of destruction, because we traveled in the Kiev region around Bucha and Irpin, where these awful massacres took place, and I imagine that when I would encounter these sites in person, that it would strike me in a deeper way. But I had a weird experience of it, in which I theorize and speculate in the film that I have perhaps desensitized myself by overly researching for the film, or just whether for the film or just my media consumption, that when I encounter these sites in person, it almost seems like hyper real or surreal, to the point that I don't know, fried the circuitry of the way my emotions should be working when you see something so awful, when you're standing at a mass grave. Yeah, so I don't know exactly, as I say, it's kind of speculation on my own, the way my emotions work, but I was surprised at the way I felt when I visited these places. It's not what I expected, and I suppose, I react often much more emotionally to seeing images and videos, and I'm not sure why. I don't offer an answer in the film. It's just an observation, I suppose.
Maybe we can talk a little about desensitization, because there is a general critique of the visual turn regarding how that we all consume a lot of explicit media, of course, and that way, so as you both of you said, become sort of numb and a little bit distant and shielded towards all these images. Do you think that the role of documentary filmmaking is to re-sensitize people towards the war, maybe, or is it something else? I know there is not a good answer for this question. This is sort of a philosophical question that I'm trying to address here. Like, what is the role? Is it to give you back the sensation of being, alive, and to I don't know the right words, and I'm sorry, but I think you understand what I'm trying to ask to all of you, basically.
Yes, sorry. I think if you completely feel this desensitization and feel antagonistic to and not receptive, I think you need to go to psychiatrist, not to documentary film festival, maybe. But no, it's just a joke. I think it's more niche, and I think people who are really interested in the topic, they still have the place in their hearts for empathy and for consuming this type of content. And I think uniqueness of the documentary in this matter is just in social media or in the general news sources, it's just unfiltered, just news, information, images. And in documentary, it's someone curated it, it's some angle, it's some music, as you said, it's all the setups that deep you into the story. So I think it's very important, but unfortunately, it's not so widespread as just news and so other content. And also, I also understand why it's niche, because people want to have fun, and if they spend a lot of they were working hard, maybe they would like to watch some stuff on Netflix, which is much more light. But I don't have an answer to your question. It's more like a general observation.
I like the word resensitize that you used. I would hope that great documentaries on this topic, like some of the work that you've curated into the Ukrainian panorama section, can resensitize people, but I think it's a very difficult question. It's like a paradox, and because this is something which an issue, I suppose, that I contended with when we were making the film, which I talk about openly in the narration at a certain point, is that I was, reflecting on this topic of desensitization. If the more images and the more media and material that's shown of a war can actually make people care less, then is us even making this film going to be counterproductive? Is us adding more visual noise to the information space actually going to just overall make people care less, pay attention less? And if so, should we just do nothing? Should we stop making this kind of films? And that's the kind of question that we're discussing often right now, because we're working on a couple of new projects and just exploring different potential approaches to visual languages which can maybe bypass this dynamic of desensitization. We're thinking about how and why people, to respond to what you said, Luba, why people would want to, say they're on Netflix or something, and there's a documentary about the war in Ukraine, or there's just some Sex in the City or the stuff that you watch. And why would they would choose one than the other? And I think I suppose the theory I have is just clear, gruesome, graphic reality, which is just shown in this very visual, graphic way, is just, of course, very uncomfortable. And so perhaps, my question, which we haven't answered yet, hopefully with the next film we can move closer to that, is how can we still engage with these topics with maybe not with removing the graphic confrontation from the media experience, but still talking about the issue. And perhaps that would be something which broadly would be a bit more comfortable to watch. I mean, part of me, as I say that, feels that no, you shouldn't try and, people shouldn't feel comfortable when they're like thinking and watching about the war in Ukraine or any war. You should be made to feel uncomfortable. But then another part of me is thinking like, okay, but if they feel so uncomfortable when thinking and engaging with this topic that they just want to shut it off completely, then maybe that's a problem and maybe that's like counterproductive. So I'm going to be honest, I forgot what your question was, but yeah, that's an answer maybe.
How do you imagine this new film stylistically? Like only doing interviews or what? How do you achieve this?
So yeah, like I say, withdrawing the kind of graphic confrontation from the image. There's actually a couple of great Ukrainian documentaries out right now which do a version of this, like capturing perhaps the in-between mundane still moments, like everyday moments, like of normal mundane rhythms of life. One I saw in Berlin recently, Songs of Slow Burning Earth, like incredible film.
We had that at the festival last year.
Oh really? Yeah, like incredible film. And so that's something which I think is very powerful. Another element which we're looking at is exploring the use of military imaging technologies. I mean, as I say that, it sounds like I'm, contradicting myself. But to capture non-military context, like scenes of everyday life. And one reason why I think that could be valuable is because when you imagine like a thermal image or like night vision or something like that, you can perhaps, and like a figure depicted in that visual style, you can maybe tell the gender or the age of the person perhaps, but you can't really tell much else. And so it kind of removes this markers of individual identity and it abstracts an image to make it perhaps less individual and more collective. And then it just perhaps it allows you to kind of zoom out and engage with, for instance, the film I'm talking about, which we're working on, is engaging with the topic of collective trauma. And so it's a bit more of an abstract, less brutal and graphic approach to the topic of trauma, for instance, less brutal and graphic than our film, The Longer You Bleed, but it still engages with the issue. Like any sort of ways in which we can really talk about the topics directly of war, of trauma, but perhaps without the gruesome elements. I feel like I've ended it on an oversimplified note, but that's just, it's a very open conversation in our development process right now about how to do this.
I'm also a little bit guilty of this sensitization because I watch so many of these type of films constantly and all the time, and I also sometimes teach at classes and universities, and I had a class where I showed the students 20 days of Mariupol, and I think if you haven't seen that film, that's probably one of the most explicit and traumatizing documentaries. It is made by Mstislav Chernov, who won an Oscar for that film. He's also the director of 2,000 Meters from Andrivka, another famous documentary. And why I'm talking about that film is because his approach is that he shows everything. It's very direct and very explicit, and you can see real death in the film, and you can see bodies torn apart, and you can see dying children and everything that is even horrible to talk about. And yes, and the film is, although the film is highly celebrated and won an Oscar, it is also being criticized ethically a lot of the time, because people are saying that he's getting too close to the topic, too close to the subject, and he's crossing a line of ethical or moral line. And I think what is interesting about that film is that Chernov is not a stupid person. He addresses that, because I don't know if you have seen the film, but yeah, but there's a monologue in the film, in the half of the film, during the half of the film, and he says something like, I cannot quote him exactly, but he says that I know that I am not being ethical, but I have to show all these footages to you as bluntly as possible, because otherwise you would not believe what is happening, because the disinformation of the Russian propaganda is so strong in several countries that you would not get this reality. So I think the important factor of that film is that you have to be unethical in certain times to achieve a certain effect. And I think this is very interesting, because if we follow this logic, then that means that if there is a peacetime and everything is fine, that there is a line that you do not cross. But if war happens, you can cross that line. And yeah, I just wanted to say that I showed that film to my class, and why I'm guilty is that I watched so many of these films that I myself became a little bit distant towards them. And when I watched it again with them, those people haven't really seen any Ukrainian documentaries. They were horrified and shaken by the film. And as I watched it with them, through their eyes, somehow it felt like as I'm seeing the film for the first time again, because I saw it with a different audience, and they were like this sometimes. And I saw the film again, and oh my God, I became so desensitized that I forgot how horrible these images are. So I think this is a very interesting psychological effect that you can achieve. So solidarity and watching a film by yourself versus watching a film with a crowd that is not desensitized with this. But yeah, the other thing is that I also wanted to ask you a question about this whole monologue, and that and do you agree with Chernov?
Well, yes, because I think the nature of war is unethical. Like, it is no rules, it's no convention, it just doesn't work. The civilians being attacked, the children being attacked, the pregnant women being attacked, people in the hospitals, and he didn't falsificate any facts, he didn't made up, he just showed what he seen and witnessed with his own eyes in this first 20 days after beginning of full-scale invasion, being in Mariupol. And what is really scary is that after he left, it became much worse. Like, what you have seen there is just a fracture. Like, you know, in a horror movie, or like apocalyptic movie, you see this like preview, like what about to happen, and then it just jumps in like year later, and you see this apocalypse. It's basically what happened to Mariupol. The city was basically erased, and all that you've seen, you can multiply by like 10, maybe 100, and that's what keep happening after Mstislav Chernovich left Mariupol. So I think, you know, all this, even the ability to talk and decide what is ethical and what's unethical, it's kind of a privilege of the pacifism. Like, if you live in peace, you can be very philosophical and sophisticated about and selective about topic you want to say, and talk about what is appropriate, what is inappropriate. When if something horrible is happening, you don't have this space for gray zone. It's much easier, and I think it's important for mental sanity to kind of, for a certain period of time, just like distinguish on black and white, what is bad, what is wrong, and just show picture as raw as it is. Another thing is like, it's not like he was like just I don't know, unexpectedly showing this movie in schools. It's like if you go to the cinema, it's like a age, has like age warning. It's like a trigger warning. They let you know that you're about to watch some explicit material, so you allowed to make a choice if you're not ready to this kind of content, if you might be triggered or it's just too much for you, you just can skip it and don't watch it. Even like I recommend to watch if someone didn't watch this movie. And the same even in Instagram, if it's like explicit content, but it's like this warning, like, and you may click if you want to see it or skip.
Could you clarify what the criticism of the film was?
The criticism of the film is that the film is so explicit that it crosses an ethical line of visual representation. It shows so much death and so much suffering that it's just unethical to just be there and observe it like a, you know, like it just feels wrong. That's the critic.
But unethical to who? To like the people?
To the people,
who were like in the shots? Because maybe they didn't have like permission or something? Or
no, not about that, but you know, like their humanity is being deranged, you know, like put down or something.
Yeah, well, in that sense, I would heavily agree with Liuba. Like, this is a time of war, and I don't know. I feel like most of that criticism is coming from people outside of Ukraine or not connected to the situation. And personally, I, don't put as much value in their opinions.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe we can open this discussion to the audience as well, because I'm wondering about your perspective. And, for example, yes, thank you for the microphone. I'm asking you that, do you think that is there an ethical line that you can cross when you make a film like this? Yes, please.
Yeah, I was more wondering about the impact campaign. I mean, there's so many films with strong material, and for decades back, also like the Winter War in Finland. I mean, there's just miserable, and you see all these terrible things, and that has been a tradition for a long time. So I'm wondering today if documentary films is maybe, or they should maybe contact the politicians or being more where the power games are instead of just in festivals. So the impact campaign, some impact campaigns has a budget of the same as the whole film. So there's something, what do you want with the film? Do you, for example, have an impact campaign that your film is gonna travel into some circles which can maybe change things, or is that something you are considering? Because we have this kind of films so long time now and we don't see the change. I mean, also in Gaza, it's streamed all over what's happening there. People hanging from walls. I mean, we have seen this so long time. And the numbness you're talking about is just pacifying the whole West, the decline of the West. We have seen that for a long time. The West doesn't care. They doesn't react. They doesn't do anything. So the impact for me is very important. Maybe you can address it a little.
Yeah, I completely agree about the value of the impact campaign. That's something we've been developing over the recent months, and we're like beginning to kind of implement right now, because obviously film festivals as spaces are great, but I think integrating, so for instance with our impact campaign, there's a number of sort of areas we're looking into. One is sort of mental health within like refugee or groups of displaced peoples, and doing like community-driven screenings in cultural institutions, refugee groups, schools, university, community centers, all these types of places where there's perhaps a bit more of a diverse audience, and you can reach a larger swath of society, and just putting the films into just more spaces. That's I completely agree, because it's I mean, for the way I view our films, my film, like personally, and the way we're like looking to develop it is like the film festivals are the first point where they like come alive and they like meet the audience, and then hopefully over the next years when they like, you know, release from the film festivals, the audience can become a bit more diverse and mainstream to a degree, and it can therefore translate into a bit more meaningful impact.
I don't think you will reach Zelensky, but maybe the Kyiv festival. I mean, is there contact with some of the people up there in the government?
We're interested, like political circles, like, you know, consulates, embassies, the UN, like any sort of like putting I mean, to be honest, it's actually with our next film where our impact campaign is going to be a bit more crucial, because it's to do with like mental health medicines and innovations around mental health medicines in Ukraine. But yeah, like putting the film in front of the eyes of decision makers, policy makers, and so it's something that can't be looked away from and can influence discussions. I completely agree. Yeah, I missed that in what I said before.
Is there anyone who would like to add something or a question towards the filmmakers? Yes, thank you.
Because there are no lines in war. So there are no lines to film something or not. I think when you cross ethical line, when you watch it and then do nothing about it, just like discuss it or become numb, or it's because the purpose of these films and this amount of films is to make people do something about it.
Yeah, but sometimes maybe it's enough to just show something from the distance and not go there like too close, you know. That's what I'm trying to talk about now. That
like it's reality, and if you will just gaze away, it's unethical.
Maybe it's unethical if you look away. Yes, that's interesting.
Well, yeah, I think I agree with you, because I think the bigger purpose of making this is spread awareness and like make people engage somehow, maybe through the donations or like by spreading information. Yeah, I mean, of course, like we couldn't just, if you just watched and didn't do anything, like at least maybe you paid for tickets and it somehow like contribute. But again, yeah, I think being not active, being indifferent, it's also like a privilege of people who live in a peaceful countries, peaceful atmosphere. Yeah, if you're Ukrainian, it's much harder to distance yourself or like just watch on it and keep this like distance and philosophize questions. More like painful.
Is there any other questions? Yep.
Yeah, since we are so few here, maybe I can come up with another. You know, when we have so much desensitized people and this numbness, and we are so used to these bombs and like in these films we heard the bombs all the time. There is something that Tarkovsky did when he made Ivan's Childhood. It was a whole film about indirect. That is little. Have you seen it? Ivan's Childhood? No. It's a film about this boy who's running in the trenches back and forth, and we always see what happened after. Like something happened. We didn't see what happened. We just saw him after. We see him coming to places where they hang people, but we don't see the people. We only see the things that they have been hanged with and things like that. So it's a very poetical film using more poetry like Tarkovsky is doing in his films. So in a way it's speaking to your mind or your heart without all these effects. And I'm wondering if this kind of films, this outside the war but inside the war at the same time, but not using all these military weapons and people running and all this technical things, if that can be synthesizing the audience again, but that comes more through poetry, and if that has a longer effect on people, maybe. I haven't seen much of those films. We are so used to have all these strong images now, so maybe people doesn't have the patience for sitting there with this kind of film like Tarkovsky was doing back in time. But have you ever thought about this, that can you really make a film which is not showing what's happening, but showing the effects later?
Have you seen the film Songs of Slow Burning Earth? I think you might find what you're looking for with that film. I'd highly recommend it. It was, the way you're describing this kind of experience of that moment. I felt like I found myself in that experience with that film. I just saw it a couple of weeks ago. And I didn't get the chance to see Milanthropist, but I feel like there's notes
it's
of
similar,
that.
Yes.
I think that's very powerful too. I think because like when you're watching, for instance, even though there's great value of showing, this like GoPro footage, what's happening on the front line, so you can really just understand the brutality of what Ukrainians are, forced to go through. There is as an essential nature of showing that. However, there's also this value of this like slower, more poetic film, because I think it maybe gives you. Oh yeah, what I was saying before. This like graphic military version, I think that you're watching it with a lot of adrenaline, and you're like very much like in the moment, and you're like paying, your mind is occupied with everything that's going on often, but these like slower paced, more poetic perspectives on the same topics of war perhaps give you more space to contemplate the issue in your own mind, and I think that adds a different value. So I think there is a great value in that style of film.
Yeah, but again, this kind of slow burning films is just, it's possible to make because it's 4 years of war. Like, I think if it was a like first, second year, it's more reactionary art, because it's just, you don't have this space and mental capacity, and you don't have this distance to reflect on the events which is just happening. And another thing, I'm personally not a big fan of Tarkovsky, not just because he's Russian. Is he kill a horse in one of his movies in the sake of art? I don't know. I don't deny he's like artistic genius, but I don't think he's a good person.
But just to add a brief counterpoint as well, although I think if people are sitting in front of this style of film on this topic, and they're actually in the theatre watching it, I think it can be very impactful. But then this is also coming back to your previous question about impact campaigns, like actually getting a mainstream large audience to this like slower, more reflective type of film, I think is extremely difficult. It's, the way we are all conditioned to, well, not all, but like most of society is conditioned to have this like short attention spans and respond to this like snappy, engaging media, I think makes it very difficult to get people to see that type of film and to get an audience to it, unfortunately, because I think that's a tragedy.
Just to add, there is another field where journalist has been working in Palestine with interviewing the consequences, the traumas, the mothers of the killed people. So that's also a very interesting place. And we also see in social media now the traumatized IDF soldiers. I mean, the government is sending them out and they are killing people, but it's also the other side that they are destroying the lives of these young people. And they're sitting there, and you can see on social media, they're screaming, they cannot sleep in the night, they are alcoholized, And this crazy trips to India with all these soldiers after killing people and taking drugs. I mean, they destroy lives. It's also a very interesting effect. You don't always have to see the war. You can also see the effect of the war in all the traumas that's coming from it. That's also something documentaries should show.
I think our time is up. Okay.